The arboretum dome always smelled faintly of ozone and wet leaves, like a thunderstorm had politely passed through and wiped its feet on the grass. The climate controls simulated mid-autumn Earth weather, crisp and slightly breezy, to keep the imported flora from overheating. Inside, rows of students from 19 different worlds stood in semicircles around their instructor, listening to a lecture about chlorophyllic adaptation ratios. Ben Taylor stood among them, hands in the pockets of his academy uniform jacket, chewing the inside of his cheek and trying not to yawn. He'd already memorized the chlorophyll adaptation tables back on Earth, and he doubted they'd changed much since. A few feet away, a squat insectoid with shimmering carapace segments kept tapping its datapad like it was recording the professor's every word. Ben's attention drifted. His eyes found something more interesting: a tall, straight-trunked tree near the outer edge of the dome, smooth silver bark, long drooping leaves. He walked toward it slowly, reading the small plaque at its base. Eucalyptus globulus, blue gum tree, Earth origin, imported under license 47.3b. Ben's brows lifted. He knew this tree. His grandfather used to strip bark from these things during long hikes and chew the cambium layer as a sort of makeshift gum. Said it cleared the sinuses too. The lecture droned on behind him. Ben glanced back, then forward again. No one was paying him much attention. With a quiet shrug, he reached out and peeled a narrow strip of bark from the trunk, revealing the pale layer beneath. He bent it gently, sniffed the minty sharp aroma, and popped it into his mouth. Three things happened in rapid succession. First, a shrill, overlapping screech erupted from the group behind him. It came in at least three different pitches, one high and trembly, another guttural and flanged, and a third that sounded like someone gargling metal shavings. Second, one student dropped their data pad. Another threw up a personal energy shield that shimmered blue and buzzed faintly as it activated. A third hit their emergency beacon and began shouting into their wrist comm. Third, the professor, an elderly Jarian with metallic blue skin and too many elbows, spun around and barked, "Cease ingestion immediately. Step away from the arboreal specimen." Ben froze, his jaw halfway through a chew. "Wait, what?" "You can't eat that," screamed a Lorithian student whose fronds were flared out in all directions, a sign Ben now knew meant panic. Next to her, a towering Gavaltian pointed a trembling claw. "He's digesting a living entity." "It's not alive," Ben muttered, confused. "Well, it's a tree, but not sentient." "It is an elder form," the Lorithian cried. "Your species eats elders?" "I what?" "No, it's a gum tree." The professor jabbed a spindly finger toward a red panel near the dome entrance. "Containment Protocol, 17, now." The lights dimmed slightly, a soft chime echoed through the dome, and a low hum signaled the activation of a local biohazard quarantine. Wait, Ben said, spitting the bark into his hand and holding it up. "It's from Earth. It's literally labeled. I didn't just munch on alien coral." Security was already on the way. A small hover skiff buzzed through the trees, carrying 3 Academy enforcers in green environmental suits. One was an Avernian with 6 eyes and what looked like a very cautious scanner. Another was a human, probably someone from the administrative branch. "Subject is chewing unauthorized organic matter," someone said behind him. "I wasn't chewing it like food," Ben said. "It's like gum. You don't swallow it." "Is that better?" asked the Gevaltian, visibly shaken. "You harvest bark for recreation?" Ben opened his mouth to answer, but the security team had arrived. One of them handed him a sealed mask. "Protocol," the human said. "Please comply. I'm not infected." "No one said you were. This is for potential cross-reactive agents. Tree bark can host mold spores, alkaloids, phytotoxins, and resin compounds. Standard intake scan required." Ben looked at the still glistening strip in his hand and sighed. The medbay was cooler than the arboretum and smelled like antiseptic and disappointment. Ben sat on a diagnostic chair, arms resting on the curved metal rests, while a nervous-looking nurse, Tanava, she said, from somewhere in the Hethric system, pointed a scanner at his abdomen. "Any nausea?" she asked, from behind a transparent face shield. "Nope." "Visual disturbances?" "I'm not seeing ghosts, if that's what you mean." "Please remain still. Initial readings show slight elevation in salivary terpene levels. Could be from the resin. She poked a few buttons and a hologram of Ben's stomach rotated slowly in the air. A blob of fibrous material floated in his upper digestive tract, unthreatening but stubborn. Should pass naturally, she said, slightly more relaxed. But we're running a tox screen anyway. You may have introduced compounds that interfere with other species' pheromonal systems. Ben blinked. Wait, you think I just ingested alien pheromones? No, but we share facilities. And if, say, a Nuvaxian is affected by eucalyptus resin, and you exhale near them, I'll keep my distance from the Nuvaxians. Smart. A pause stretched between them. Tanava tapped her pad. You really chew bark? Some humans do. My granddad used to. It's not common, but it's not weird. I don't believe the ethics committee will agree. Ben groaned softly and leaned back. The ethics board met 2 hours later. Ben stood in front of a crescent-shaped table beneath the gaze of 3 faculty members. Professor Shar, who looked like a sentient waterfall, Administrator Colburn, the only other human present, and Dean Jolat, whose glimmering carapace pulsed faintly with disapproval. Colburn cleared his throat. Mr. Taylor, would you care to explain what compelled you to ingest organic material from a restricted flora specimen? It's from Earth, Ben said again, trying to keep the exasperation out of his voice. A gum tree. My grandfather chewed it when we were out hiking. It's not food. It's like candy. Natural gum. Professor Shar flicked one watery limb toward the incident report. That tree was part of a biome stability demonstration. Its resin interacts with 4 atmospheric compounds. Chewing it might have shifted its emissions. Ben looked at Colburn, who was already skimming his tablet. Preliminary data suggests negligible disruption, Colburn said, though the act itself raises concerns about interspecies etiquette. Dean Jolat leaned forward. Did it not occur to you to ask before sampling from the arboretum? I didn't think anyone would care. I mean, it's labeled. I thought it was like a garden, not a museum. Shar rippled in what might have been offense. To the Lorithian student body, arboreal forms represent ancestral wisdom. I didn't eat their ancestor, Ben said, just chewed some bark. Nonetheless, Jolat said, your action caused significant disruption and required medical resources. Colburn raised a hand. There is, however, precedent. I reviewed our terrestrial botany notes. Chewing eucalyptus bark is not entirely unheard of. Unwise, Shar sniffed. But not unknown. It is not unknown. Another voice chimed in from the corner. The Arboretum's groundskeeper, a leathery-faced older man named Fisher, leaned in through the side door. If it helps, he said, I chew the stuff sometimes. Good for clearing sinus gunk. No offense intended. Jolat's carapace pulsed. That does not excuse unsanctioned ingestion. No, ma'am, Ben said quickly. I get it. I'll ask next time. You will receive a formal warning, Jolat said, and a temporary restriction from entering the Arboretum dome unsupervised. Ben winced. Understood. And, Colburn added, not unkindly, you will be required to attend a 2-hour cultural impact seminar, just to minimize future surprises. Ben nodded. Yeah, that's fair. By the end of the day, the nickname had already started circulating. He heard it first from a passing Glavaxian who snorted and said, Hey, ruminant, chewing anything else today? Ben gave a weak smile and shook his head. A Lorithian student stared at him with wide eyes and whispered, He consumes the elders. Another chuckled behind her. He gnawed on wisdom. Now he must digest its burden. Ben sat down in the cafeteria later, opened his lunch, and found a note tucked into his tray. It read, Next time, try peppermint. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But he did decide one thing. Next time, he was bringing store-bought gum. The next morning, Ben stepped into Lecture Hall G with a crinkling plastic package stuffed in his pocket. Spearmint gum, sealed, individually wrapped, utterly harmless. He had no intention of repeating yesterday's debacle. Already, his inbox was clogged with automated alerts about pending disciplinary processing, revised flora contact protocols, and a politely worded invitation to attend an interspecies empathy workshop. The hall was buzzing, not with academic focus, but low whispers and barely restrained snickers. The Larithian girl, Elta, pretended to chew dramatically when he passed. Her fronds made an exaggerated slapping sound against her torso. From the far side of the room, someone called out, "Hey, bark muncher. Does cafeteria napkin fiber count as a delicacy too?" Ben didn't respond. He just took a seat in the middle row, pulled out his tablet, and started skimming his notes. If he could power through the day without causing another cross-species panic, he'd call that progress. Professor Shar entered with an odd fluttering motion, pausing briefly to examine Ben. The watery being didn't say anything, but took a longer than necessary look at the human's mouth before starting the lecture. Today's topic was xenobotanical reproduction cycles. Ben tried to focus. He really did. But by the time they got to the fourth example of photonic flowering adaptation in low-gravity moss species, he was back to wondering why the classroom ceiling lights buzzed at exactly the same frequency as his old refrigerator back home. In a desperate bid to stay awake, he pulled out a stick of gum, unwrapped it as quietly as possible, and popped it in. "Digestive actions confirmed," chirped the seat monitor beside him. Ben slapped the sensor. "Just gum." The system went quiet. A few students, having noticed, turned around with immediate suspicion. He raised the wrapper in the air like a flag of peace. "Commercial product," he said, waving it slightly. "Mint flavor. Made in Kansas." Several students watched him for another few seconds, then slowly turned back to their work. Not 10 minutes later, the back door hissed open and a tall figure ducked through. Administrator Colburn entered, glanced across the room, spotted Ben, and motioned him silently out. Ben didn't argue. He pocketed the gum and followed. The hallway outside the lecture hall had the dim, sound-dampened quiet of official trouble. Colburn motioned toward a side room, where the walls pulsed faintly with reactive privacy filters. "Good morning," Colburn said, once the door closed. "Hey," Ben replied, sitting down. "You're not in trouble again," Colburn added quickly. "I just wanted to follow up." Ben gave him a skeptical look. "You always pull students out mid-lecture for follow-ups?" "Only the culturally hazardous ones," Colburn said with a faint smile. Ben sank back into the chair, running a hand through his hair. "Is this going to follow me forever?" "Probably not forever," Colburn said, "but long enough. The incident has triggered internal protocol reviews. The ethics committee is now reconsidering open arboretum access." Ben groaned. "I didn't kill the tree." "No, but to many species, behavior matters more than outcome. You need to understand there are students here who view trees as ancestral lines. One species believes the bark holds memory impressions. Another views it as a repository of public record. It's not just food to them." "I didn't know," Ben said sincerely. "Which is why you're scheduled for cultural contact orientation this evening. We're having a session specifically on symbolic flora." Ben nodded. "I'll be there." Colburn tapped his tablet. "Also, someone filed a formal request. Let me guess, to have me removed from all botany classes?" "No," Colburn said, raising an eyebrow. "Actually, they want you to demonstrate your chewing technique, safely, under supervision." Ben blinked. "Wait, someone wants to watch me chew bark?" "A Nuvaxian exchange student. Apparently, your method of processing woody fiber is now being cited in a sociological comparative paper." "That's not what I want to be famous for." Too late. By afternoon, Ben had become a campus oddity. 2 students asked if he would sign a pamphlet titled "Xenobotany Missteps, a Living Document." Another tried to barter with him. One hand-painted scale chip in exchange for a tutorial on naturalistic gum fabrication. He turned them down, politely. At dinner, he sat alone, hoping to eat without commentary. He picked the least fibrous thing on the menu soup and kept his head low. But someone slid into the seat across from him. Elta, the Larithian girl with the expressive fronds. "I still think you're mildly unhinged," she said conversationally. "But I have questions." Ben raised an eyebrow. "About? That bark you chewed, what did it taste like?" "Strong. Like mint and pine had a baby, then dunked it in lemon oil." "Did it sting?" "A little. It numbs your tongue after a while." Elta tilted her head. "We have a ceremonial paste that does something similar. It's used before marriages to represent the muting of former lives." Ben blinked. "That's poetic." My cousin ate a full ounce by mistake. He couldn't speak for 3 days. Ben chuckled. I can relate. She leaned in. Do humans usually ingest things without understanding them fully? He hesitated. Not usually, but we do have a saying. If it smells okay and doesn't scream, it's probably fine. Elta's fronds fluttered in what might have been alarm. That explains a lot. That evening's cultural contact orientation took place in a low-ceilinged classroom near the diplomat wing. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing sacred plants from dozens of worlds. A small hologram near the door read, Welcome, students. Today's topic, interpreting consumption. Ben sat between a burbling gelatinous entity from Acor and a Yulkin student who brought his own air canister. Across the room, Dean Julat floated in, flanked by 2 tall assistants carrying samples of synthetic bark strips. The dean began. Today's session was prompted by a recent incident involving terrestrial flora and cross-cultural misunderstanding. We are here not to shame, but to educate. A few glances flicked toward Ben. He tried to look small. On Vrel, the dean continued, consuming tree bark is equivalent to ingesting a living library. On Hethrix, it is a romantic act, signaling permanence. On Earth, apparently, it is recreational. Ben raised a hand cautiously. May I clarify? It's not common. It's more of an old-fashioned thing, like chewing on grass stems. The Yulkin beside him leaned over. Your species eats grass too? No, not eat, just choose. For fun. Boredom, bad habit. Jolad interjected. Regardless, we ask all students to confirm local flora status before engaging with it physically, even if it originates from their own homeworld. Everyone nodded. A few students began flipping through the distributed pamphlets. Near the end, Jolat surprised everyone. Mr. Taylor, if you are willing, we have prepared a sterilized sample of the same eucalyptus species for academic demonstration. Ben stared at the tray being passed forward. The bark was sealed in a transparent container, labeled clearly. He swallowed. You want me to chew it? For comparative education, students from 4 sectors have expressed curiosity. Ben took the container. Slowly, with deliberate movements, he opened it, selected a narrow strip, and placed it on his tongue. A dozen recorders switched on. He chewed once, twice. The familiar numbing zing spread through his mouth. It's like spicy gum, he said through the chew. Strong aroma, no sugar. Several aliens leaned forward in fascination. One asked, Do you feel different? I feel tingly. That's either the tree resin, Jolat said calmly, or a mild allergic response. Medbay is on standby. Ben kept chewing, still worth it. By week's end, Ben was no longer the arboreal pariah. The cafeteria had added, Note, all foliage is decorative only signs. Professor Shar grudgingly nodded at him during class. And a new elective had quietly been added to the spring schedule. Edible Earth Flora, a hazardous introduction. The syllabus opened with a caution in bold, underlined text. Never assume the human isn't eating something. Check first. Ben smiled when he read that, then quietly unwrapped another stick of store-bought gum. Just in case. By the 2nd month of the semester, Ben had learned to carry laminated ingredient cards. They were color-coded and translated into 6 common languages spoken at the Academy: Earth Standard, Vrelian Pictograph, Torshi Glyph, Hethrix Pulse Symbols, Lorical Tone Strings, and basic Yulkin waveform notation. Each card said, in some version of Don't Panic and This Gum is Not Alive. He flashed them every time he unwrapped a piece. It wasn't a joke, not anymore. Because somehow, a minor chewing habit had evolved into a full-fledged cross-cultural talking point. There was now a standing order from the Academy's Office of Diplomatic Engagement to notify ahead of time if any human was planning to consume flora in shared environments. Ben didn't mind. He was still allowed to chew gum. That was the important part. Today, however, he wasn't chewing anything. He stood stiffly beside a display booth inside the Intercultural Exchange Dome, dressed in formal student attire and flanked by 3 carefully curated samples of Earth flora, a packet of dried peppermint leaves, a glass vial of birch bark shavings, and a sealed, labeled stick of commercial spearmint gum. The booth sign read, Earth Sensory Practices, Voluntary Ingestion and its Symbolic Context. He hadn't chosen the name. The dean's office had. There were other booths, too. A Yulkin group demonstrating their ceremonial steam blowing. A Vrelian student guiding curious guests through the art of memory leaf folding. A gelatinous accordion offering scent-based resonance recordings. Ben's was the only booth that involved putting something in your mouth. And no matter how many times he explained that this wasn't typical for most humans, that bark chewing was an obscure practice, at best it didn't seem to matter. People came, people asked, people watched. Is this one the memory tree? Asked a pale green Avernian, pointing at the birch. Nope, Ben said. Birch. High methyl salicylate content. Kind of like wintergreen. Humans used to chew it for flavor, or mild pain relief. Not recommended now. Stick to the gum. The Avernian squinted. Why pain relief? Chemical interaction with nerves. It numbs sensation slightly. Fascinating, like our pre-hibernation root slime. Sure, Ben said. Another student stepped forward, Lorithian, judging by the faint glow of her fronds. I wish to attempt the act, she said with solemnity. Chewing? Ben asked. Yes. The earth-styled ingestion. Is this the bark? No, Ben said quickly. That's gum. Totally synthetic. Lab-made. You're good. She picked it up, examined it, and after a slight hesitation, popped it into her mouth. The reaction was slow. Her fronds lifted, her eyes widened, her glow shifted from amber to pale teal. It tastes like aggression wrapped in snow, she whispered. That's spearmint, Ben offered. She nodded slowly. I understand now. Your people are intense. Ben wasn't sure that was a compliment. By mid-afternoon, 3 more students had tried gum under supervision. One spat it out immediately, claiming it bit back. Another carefully bagged their sample to study later in a containment unit. The third began planning a thesis titled Oral Fixation Across Sapient Species, The Human Compulsion to Chew. Ben took a break, escaping behind the booth's partition where a folding chair and hydration unit waited. Elta joined him a few moments later, holding 2 filtered beverages. Still chewing your legacy? She asked, passing one to him. Trying not to become it, Ben said. She flared in amusement. Too late. You're the face of botanical ingestion. Ben groaned. I was bored. That's all it was. A quiet afternoon in the arboretum. I wasn't trying to start an ecological uprising. Intent is secondary to perception, Elta replied. He took a sip from the drink. Do you guys ever eat plants? Technically, once, at death. Ben blinked. That got dark. We use ground roots in our cremation rites. Symbolic return to the soil, but never alive, never conscious, certainly never chewed. Well, Ben said, that explains your reaction. Elta's fronds curled. To be fair, I only activated my panic alarm. Noko activated an ecological shield. That was excessive. Ben chuckled. I think he thought I was digesting a sentient tree. Elta hesitated. It's strange, you know. I used to think humans were the reckless ones, always poking, chewing, exploring things they didn't understand. Ben raised an eyebrow. Used to? Now I think maybe you're not reckless, just curious in ways the rest of us aren't prepared for. Ben smiled. That's generous. It's also why there's a new class next semester. Ben nodded. He'd seen the registration sheet. Edible Earth Flora, a hazardous introduction. The course had filled within hours. That evening, Ben attended the class briefing for the new elective. He wasn't enrolled, but he'd been invited to observe. The instructor, a grizzled exobiologist named Dr. Kiraldi, stood at the front of the room beside a digital chalkboard filled with warnings. The class began like this. Rule 1. Just because the human is eating it doesn't mean you can. Ben winced slightly. Rule 2. Always verify the flora's sentient status. Trees that look passive aren't always uncommunicative. Students took notes quickly. Several glanced at Ben, who sat quietly in the back row. Rule 3, Dr. Kiraldi said. Chewing is not universal. Among over 400 recorded sapient species, only 2 habitually masticate non-nutritional substances for sensory stimulation. Humans are the primary one. The other is a worm-based telepathic species that chews sand for taste memory. Ben raised his hand. What's the sand taste like? Dr. Caraldi gave him a long look. Don't start. 2 days later, a handwritten note appeared in Ben's locker. From the desk of Dean Jolat. Mr. Taylor, your recent participation in intercultural outreach has produced unexpected interest in the chemical properties of native Earth flora. Enclosed, please find a permit authorizing supervised collection of arboretum-grown eucalyptus samples. All usage must be declared and logged. Please refrain from spontaneous ingestion. Also, enclosed is a mint lozenge from my personal collection. I find the flavor invigorating. Use responsibly. Ben folded the note and stared at the small round candy enclosed in the pouch. Dean Jolat had given him candy. The same Dean who once threatened to quarantine him for chewing tree bark. He smiled. That weekend, the Arboretum Dome reopened for unrestricted student visits, with new signage installed at every entrance. Notice, do not ingest plant life without authorization, even if you are Earthian. And underneath it, in smaller letters. If unsure, ask the human. Ben walked the path past the gum tree and paused. The bark had regrown slightly in the weeks since. It still smelled faintly of mint and resin. He didn't chew it. He didn't need to. Instead, he pulled out his pack of gum, popped a stick in, and resumed walking. Behind him, a small group of students watched carefully, whispering. One Yulkin hesitated, then stepped forward and picked up a fallen piece of bark from the path. He sniffed it, then looked at Ben. May I? Ben nodded. Only if you're sure. The Yulkin placed it in his mouth, chewed, and froze. A long pause. Then, eyes wide, he said, It does freshen the breath. Ben woke with a headache and a calendar notification that read, simply, Ethics Committee debrief, final review. Attendance required. No further context, no details, just a time block and a room number. Never a good sign. He sat up slowly in his dorm bunk, rubbed the side of his head, and stared at the message. Was this about the gum again, or the demonstration booth? Or the part where the Yulkin had attempted to brew eucalyptus tea in a microwave? He really hoped it wasn't the tea thing. That had technically not been his idea. Ben dressed, grabbed a thermos of plain tea, no bark, no mint, no creative risks, and made his way to Administration Tower 2, the one with walls that whispered warnings if you walked too close to the sealed doors. He kept his hands in his jacket pockets the whole time. No one needed to worry about spontaneous chewing today. When he arrived at room 312, the door opened automatically. Dean Jolat sat at the far end of a long, curved table, carapace reflecting soft ambient light. Next to him was Colburn, ever calm, and a third member Ben hadn't seen before, a feline humanoid with bioluminescent whiskers and a narrow face full of disapproval. Mr. Taylor, Jolat began, thank you for being on time. Sure. Morning, Ben said carefully, taking the seat they offered. We've reviewed all relevant incident reports, cross-referenced with post-demonstration behavioral data and anecdotal testimonies from your fellow students. Ben cleared his throat. I didn't tell anyone else to eat bark. No, said the whiskered official, but they did, and in your presence. They asked. Colburn interjected, voice mild. No further incidents have occurred. In fact, the recent Arboretum behavior metrics show an increase in caution and interspecies communication. Somewhat paradoxically, Dean Jolat nodded, which leads us to a rather unexpected conclusion. Ben braced. We are formally closing the ethics inquiry regarding your arboreal ingestion, Jolat said. You are cleared of further responsibility. Ben blinked. I am? Pending one final action, the third official added. You will assist in the development of a mandatory cross-cultural orientation video. Ben exhaled, leaning back. That's it? No probation? No food sensor implants? Do you want one? Asked Jolat dryly. Nope, I'm good. The orientation video was filmed in a white-walled studio with a fake tree backdrop and a student volunteer from the Vrelian delegation holding a clipboard. Ben stood in front of the camera while a bored technician counted them in. "State your name and purpose," the student prompted. "Ben Taylor," he said, "and I'm here to help you not accidentally violate ecological protocol by putting things in your mouth." "Condense that," the technician said. Ben sighed. "I chewed tree bark once. Don't do that without checking first." "Better." He demonstrated the proper way to scan a plant tag for its edibility and cultural status. He held up a bark sample beside a gum wrapper. He even read a short disclaimer about human digestive enzymes and their potential to break down substances considered sacred in other species. Then he looked into the camera, chewed once, gum this time, and said, "When in doubt, spit it out." It made the final cut. To his horror. 2 weeks later, the elective class Edible Earth Flora held its first lab session. Dr. Caraldi, now fully leaning into his new role as the edible plant guy, had constructed a tasting station with a dozen samples, none of them toxic, all Earth origin. Ben attended as a guest speaker. "This is not a buffet," Caraldi warned before class began. "Do not sample without instructor approval. Do not hoard. Do not ferment." Ben sat off to the side as students approached the display cautiously. Elta stood beside him, watching with amused interest. "Are they really going to eat that?" she asked, pointing at a tray labeled Licorice Root Earth, organic, safe for most species. "I mean," Ben said, "they're trying. Half of them will spit it out." A Yulkin student did exactly that seconds later. "It tastes like punishment." Ben grinned. Next up was the peppermint. The same Larithian who'd tried gum during the intercultural event approached, lifted a sanitized leaf, and inhaled deeply before licking it. Her fronds glowed again teal, then lavender. "I think I like it," she said softly. Another student, a squat, moss-skinned Vrix, took a sliver of cinnamon bark and cautiously nibbled. His eyes widened. "It tastes like sunlight feels." Elta nudged Ben. "You've caused something strange." "I didn't mean to." "But you did something useful. You exposed everyone to the idea that ingesting can be personal, symbolic, not just for survival." Ben looked at the line of students, each cautiously trying earth plants under supervision, recording notes, sharing reactions. "I guess I did," he said. One evening, near the end of term, Ben received a private comm message from the Office of Cultural Liaison. The sender was unfamiliar, but the tone was polite and oddly excited. "Mr. Taylor, we've reviewed your conduct during the incident, your participation in cross-cultural education, and your willingness to endure the consequences of a misunderstanding with grace and cooperation. We would like to offer you an internship over the interterm break with our Outreach and Intergalactic Integration Division, working on the new program, Shared Traditions, Learning Through Taste." Ben stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Happy to chew things under supervision." The response came back a minute later. "We'll bring the bark." Graduation was still far off, but by now, everyone knew Ben. Some still teased him. Others saluted him with mock chewing gestures when they passed. A few brought him samples of their own cultural chewables, from spicy root paste to air-puffed dried algae. Ben tried them all. He was careful. He read every label. He carried antihistamines just in case. He never chewed bark again in public. Except once. At the very end of the semester, just before the arboretum closed for winter maintenance, he walked the familiar path past the eucalyptus tree. The air was cool and sharp. Leaves rustled like a soft warning. Ben stopped, looked around, saw no signs of sentient observers. He peeled a small piece. Just the inner layer. Fresh, pale, resinous. He didn't eat it. Just held it. "Thank you," he said quietly to the tree, "for not killing me. And for everything else." Then he tucked the bark into a pouch. He'd dry it, label it, share it during orientation next term. Maybe next time, he'd start the class himself.